previous videos, we've used transactions to insert, change, or delete records from the database, always using their screens with the buttons and controls available to this end. In this video, we'll see how to perform the same operations, this time using commands written in a piece of code from any GeneXus object using business components. Let's see this with an example related to the travel agency we've used before. Suppose that some attractions are visited by so many tourists that we need to classify them differently in order to offer tours to these places in particular. For example, in Beijing, due to the popularity of its monuments, we don't want to classify them as monuments any longer. Instead, we want to classify them as tourist sites. This will be a new category that will allow us to identify those attractions that receive large numbers of visitors, regardless of the type of attraction previously used to classify them. We will need to create this new category and move all of Beijing's attractions in the monument category over to the tourist site category. To do this, we will have to insert a new category in the category table and then run through the attractions in the attraction table, filtering by city equal to Beijing and by category equal to monument in order to change the category code to tourist site. So before moving on, note that we have added an error rule to the category transaction, just like to attraction, to control that the name cannot be left empty. We'll see what we'll use this for in a moment. To implement the creation of the new category and the update of attractions, we will create a procedure object that we call Insert Category Update Attractions. What we need to do first is create the tourist site category. To do so, we will use a business component from category. To create it, we open the category transaction, find the business component property, and we'll set it to true. As a result, GeneXus will create a structure based on the category transaction, whose associated features will be similar to those of the transaction. To be able to use this definition, we need to create a variable of this category business component type. So, we open the Variables tab of the procedure, create a variable called category, and we can see that GeneXus automatically assigns it the category data type. This data type corresponds to the category business component based on the category transaction. If we open the variable properties and click on data type, we will find a group called business component. If we open this group, we will find the business component category with the same icon as a transaction. We've confirmed that GeneXus has created a new data type based on the category transaction. Next, we will see that it shares many features with it. We return to the procedure source, but before using the variable to create the tourist site category, we will run the category transaction to remember how to add a category when we use the transaction screen. When we open the transaction, we see that by default it expects the user to enter a new record. First, we would click on the category identifier, but since the category ID attribute is auto-numbered, we don't need to assign it a value. So, we press the Tab key to exit the field and we'll leave it empty. Next, we have to type the category name. What will happen if we leave it empty? The error rule that controls that the category name attribute is not left empty will be triggered. So, in the category name, we type tourist site and press Tab. Lastly, once the values that we wanted for the attribute categories have been assigned, we press the Confirm button to have the data saved in the database. And the insertion has been completed. When we use a business component, the sequence of operations is exactly the same. To insert a new record, we assign values to the category's fields and then confirm the changes. To do so, we insert the category variable in the source. By typing a period, several methods available are displayed, such as save, delete, and check. Category ID and category name are also displayed, and we can also assign a value to them. Since we know that the category identifier is auto-numbered, we don't assign a value to it. By default, it also assumes that we will enter a value. Just like we did in the transaction screen, we continue with the category name. We select the category name and press enter. We assign the tourist site name to the category name. Business components are interesting because the rules defined in the transaction used to create them will also be triggered. Therefore, if in our example we had not assigned a name to the category, the error rule that controls this would have been triggered, just as it happens when we use the category transaction screen. This won't happen when the assignment is found in the code, but when the business component is saved. It should be pointed out that not all the rules will be triggered. Since we're running the business component through code, it won't be possible to trigger any rules that call another object with a screen. For example, another transaction or a web panel. The parm rule would not be triggered either, even if it had been defined in the transaction. So it's clear that if we leave the category without a name, the record will not be inserted. But where will the error message be displayed since we don't have a screen now? In every knowledge base, GeneXus creates a predefined SDT called messages that is a collection of items. In the same example, if we were working with the transaction screen, once we assign the category name, we would have to press the confirm button. With business components, we use the save method. For each business component variable, such as category, when a save operation is performed, a collection of messages is loaded in memory. All the warning or error messages are displayed as a consequence of this operation. We can obtain it and run through it very easily, but we won't talk about that here. Alright, so far we've created the tourist site category. Now we will change China's monuments categories. Suppose that we only need to change the Great Wall of China's category, which is ID equals 2. How do we do it in a transaction? We open the attraction transaction, and actually, our transaction was changed when we applied the pattern. From then on, it receives parameters and it cannot be run directly. So we have it saved with this other name, and we removed all the rules added by the pattern, and in particular the parm rule. The physical table that this transaction will work on is the same as the attraction table because they share the same identifier. These attractions are called parallel transactions. So we'll run the parallel transaction. In the ID, we type 2, we leave the field, and GeneXus brings all the details of the Great Wall. Next, we change the values that we're interested in, the category in this case, and we save by pressing confirm. We can see that the change is made and that all the corresponding rules have been triggered. For example, if we had removed the attraction's name, the update would have failed. In addition, if we had replaced the category ID with a non-existent one, since GeneXus checks for consistency in the values between related tables, referential integrity, an error would have been displayed. Also, the change would not have been made. The same will happen with the business component. Let's see this. First, we create the business component based on the attraction transaction. Now, we open the procedure and create an attraction table of the attraction business component data type that has just been created. To select an attraction, we use the load command, and between brackets we type the attraction ID, which in this case is 2. Next, we assign the category value, the ID value of the tourist site category that we created before, and finally, we'll click on Save. Note that here, we're using the ID value assigned to the category that we created with the business component. Because we tried to load an existing record, the save operation knows that we're trying to make an update and not an insertion. However, we not only need to change the Great Walls category, but the categories of all the attractions in Beijing that are monuments. To this end, we'll run through all these attractions and we'll type the following. Since now we're running through records in a for each command, we will load the ID of the attraction in which we're positioned in each iteration. Since each save may or may not be successful, depending precisely on the business rules and referential integrity, the records may or may not have been inserted or changed in the database. To find out if a save command was successful or not, we have the success method that returns true if it was successful and false otherwise. The save command may fail because an error rule was triggered and didn't allow saving, or there was a system failure when saving and the record wasn't saved as a result. Also, referential integrity may have failed. If the new category wasn't successfully inserted, saving the attractions will obviously fail because the category will not exist. So, we condition the changes to attractions in this way. Now we only need to tell the database that the records that we've inserted or updated are correct, and that we want to have them entered in such a way that they aren't lost in the event of a system failure. This is done by adding the commit command. At this point, we know that the category has been successfully saved and that the attractions have been changed, that is, for all those that didn't give an error due to a business rule that prevented it. Now we need the database to accept all these updates. We've inserted a record and changed others. If a system failure occurred, for example due to a power outage, the databases are recovered and all the operations that weren't committed are undone. The commit command is a special command that allows us to tell the database when to end the blocking of operations that we want to have performed altogether. And if it can't be done, then they must all be undone. When this command is executed, the database saves the data in such a way that it can't be lost in the event of a system failure or power outage. So, if the operations are successfully executed, at this moment the new category will be inserted, and all the attractions will be updated. If the category insertion had failed, this blocking wouldn't have been made, and therefore the commit wouldn't have been executed either. To run our procedure, we need another GeneXus object to invoke it. This can be done from a web panel object. A web panel is a screen that can be designed as needed to perform many functions, such as viewing the database data, creating a start screen for a system, or to enter data. In this case, we will create a web panel with a button that calls the procedure that we previously created. Let's do it. We create an object of web panel type and give it a name, categories, and attractions. A blank screen has been created, ready to be designed. We open the toolbox and add a label with this text. Create the new category tourist site and assign it to all the attractions of Beijing with category monument. Next, we insert a button with a caption that reads Do, and next we will add another button that reads Undo. We right-click on the button and select Go to Event. An event window is displayed with a Do event. When the user clicks on the button, we want to run the procedure that we created, so we invoke it. We can type its name, or rather, to avoid mistakes, drag it and make sure that we type the brackets that will contain the parameters. In this case, they're not necessary. We press F5. Let's not forget to delete the tourist site category that we had entered through the transaction. We open the category transaction and click on the category. When we try to delete it, a referential integrity warning is displayed because we'd already changed the Great Wall category to tourist site. So we open the attraction transaction and we change the Great Wall category to monument, its previous value. Now we can delete the tourist site category to create it again through the procedure and the business component. We run the web panel that calls the procedure. We click on the Do button, and see if the procedure worked correctly. We open Work with Attractions and see that the tourist site category has been created. Also, that the Great Wall and Forbidden City attractions now have the category previously created. Let's return to GeneXus and look at the procedure code. For the category, GeneXus inferred that it had to perform an insert. In the second case, when we changed the value of the attraction category, it realized that it was an update, just like it does with a transaction. That's why we used the save method that has the intelligence to save data regardless of the operation performed. We could also have forced the operation, typing this in the first case. Category.insert, and this in the second, attraction.update. Note that we wouldn't have needed the load, and we could have written attraction.attractionID equals attractionID. Because we've indicated that we want to perform an attractions update, GeneXus knows that we want to update a record. So it'll perform an implicit load before the assignment. With these changes, the code would look as follows. In addition to the insert and update operations to indicate that we want to perform an insertion or a change, we also have the insert or update operation. With it, by assigning new values to attributes, GeneXus will try to make an insert. If it can't, because, for example, there already exists a record with that key, it'll try to make an update. It should also be noted that, as we've seen, it's possible to insert and update records from two different tables inside the same object, in this case a procedure. In addition, this code could have been entered directly in the web panel event, because database updates through business components can be made from any object, with some restrictions when using transactions. If we wanted to undo these operations, we add an undo button to the web panel. In its associated code, we would have to delete the tourist site category that we've just created and set the attraction categories that we had changed to tourist site as monuments once again. How would we delete the category using the transaction? First, we would place it selecting its ID. Next, we would press the delete button. It'll be the same if we use business components through a method with that same name. We know that the tourist site category ID is 5, so we type the following. If we didn't know the ID, we would search for it with the find formula. The find formula is an inline formula that allows us to find the first record that meets the condition, and for this record, it returns the value of the attribute indicated here. We assign the result to the category ID variable, which we have defined with the same type as the category ID attribute. Here we load it according to the content of that variable. However, this operation will fail, just like it'll fail when we do it through the transaction. Let's confirm this by opening the category transaction and deleting the tourist site category. GeneXus tells us that it can't be deleted. Why? Because the transaction is controlling the referential integrity between categories and attractions. Since it has found attractions that have the tourist site category assigned, remember that we've just assigned them, it doesn't allow us to delete that category. The business component will do the same by making a referential integrity check when the delete code is run. The tourist site category cannot be deleted because there are transactions with that category, and they would be left without one. So before doing that, we will have to change these attraction categories and assign them their previous category, monument. Since in general we don't remember identifier values, but we do remember names, it's safer to look for their names in the database. So, to retrieve the ID value of the monument category, we use the inline find formula. For each attraction in Beijing with the tourist site category, we load all their details in the attraction business component variable. We only change category ID by assigning it that of monument and update. And now we can delete the tourist site category. Lastly, let's not forget to do a commit to confirm that the changes or deletions should be effectively made on the database. So, in the event of a system failure, due to the rollback performed by databases when they recover, the records that had been changed or deleted will not be restored. We know that if some of the attractions couldn't be updated, the category delete will also fail. In this case, we can ask if the category was successfully deleted to perform commit. We type the following. Otherwise, if we don't want any changes to the database to be effectively made, we can force the rollback. That is to say, we can undo everything that has been done. This will be our final code. We run and press undo. And we can see that Beijing's attractions are monuments once again. Also, that the tourist site category no longer exists. If we now click on Do, we can see the category once again. As well as the attractions with that category. Note that if we wanted to delete all the previous attractions instead of changing their category, we should delete all those records from the attraction table. This can be done through a for-each command with delete. To see this, we will create a massive insert remove web panel with a remove data button. So in the associated event, we type the following. Note that the order in which deletions are performed is important, because as we know, business components check for referential integrity, and for this reason, we can't delete categories first. We run it, and we can see that the records have been deleted from the tables. In sum, we've learned that business components are a special data type, built based on a transaction as a reflection of it. It allows us to do the same as a transaction, except for what is related to its screen. That's why, when we have the business component mirror of the transaction, we can define a variable of this data type. It'll be like a structured SDT, with the same structure as the transaction. Through the load, save, and delete methods, or insert, update, and delete, we can perform the same operations that we interactively use in transactions, making sure that business rules are triggered as if the transaction has been executed. Which business rules? Those not related with working interactively through a screen, or that don't invoke another screen. That's why we say that running a business component is like running the transaction in a silent way. For a single level transaction, such as attraction, the business component structure will only contain not only an element per attribute physically present in the associated table, but also attributes such as category name, country name, or city name that are included in the transaction structure as inferred through foreign keys. They have the same function as in transactions, to make it possible to infer values after making a load. The insert, update, or delete operations can also be massively performed on a collection of business components that we don't know how to load yet. That is to say, suppose that if we had a collection variable of business components and we had all the attractions loaded in an attractions variable where each item was of attraction business component type. Then we could delete them all by typing attractions delete, with no need to run through the collection one item at a time in order to delete them one by one. In the following video, we will see an example that adds records in a massive way using insert. Before moving on, we send to GeneXus server what we've done.